I think.
Sorry, I'm just having a wee bit of difficulty with recording. I said I would record this session, and I'm not sure if I'm doing it right. I think you're right. That's quite a good point about actually when people are buying, when people are the customers, then they're looking for something which is local to them. But of course, you can't have people growing food in lots and lots of very small local locations. Food production or growing food, by definition, is something that you do in you do in a concentrated area and then you distribute it afterwards. And I think that's one of the things that maybe the local food plan might look at, because our question is, how can a local food plan help and have a positive impact on the environment and on the biodiversity? Now, we've been talking about the environmental aspects, the transport and that sort of thing, but I'm going to go to, there's a couple of people popped their hands up, so I'm going to go to Callum first of all, and Kerry after Callum, if that's all right. But Callum, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Alistair. I think the whole local food definition of local is a whole session in itself. I mean, you could probably talk about it all morning. But coming back to the actual question, how can a local food plan have a positive impact on environment and biodiversity? Well, I think there's a big thing in here about access to markets. So coming back to what Sharon said about our growth traveling through to Crieff or vice versa, as a business, you need to make money, you need to have access to markets. And at the end of the day, if they need to travel to sell their food or their produce, then they're going to do it. But that also has an impact on the environment in terms of emissions, transport, logistics. So I think having greater access to markets and also collaboration between businesses, and this is something that perhaps the likes of regional food groups or the likes of I know that Julie's here, but the Perthshire Food Tourism Group would be a really strong proposition, is where businesses are working together, and it's, you've got suppliers, buyers, networking, working together, and then it is going to be reducing the overall environmental impact.
So do you mean, Callum, something like food producers maybe getting together and organising, instead of all organising individual transport, some kind of collaborative effort to reduce the environmental footprint of getting what they produce to market?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's definitely avenues to investigate. I'm not sure how that works in practice. If you've got multiple producers all looking for logistics on the same day at the same time, it could be a logistical nightmare. But I think if it hasn't been investigated so far, I think it should be.
Yep, no, that's good. And just so everybody knows, we're not asking for answers today. So Callum, don't worry, I'm not going to get you to answer your own question. It's fine just to suggest it. I'm going to go to Kerry next. You had your hand up earlier on, and then maybe, did you put your hand up there a wee minute ago, Sharon? Yeah, I'll come to you after Kerry. Kerry, go ahead.
Well, I was just interested in what you said about, well, you couldn't have lots of small producers locally, that it has to be larger growing strategies. I don't think we should really assume that necessarily, and I think that does connect directly to the environmental impact and biodiversity, in the sense that, well, why couldn't you have lots of little local food growing strategy or projects that grow, that food was made for just that little village? For example, I live near Kirkmichael, which is not far from Blairgowrie. And it's amazing how many little small food growing projects are popping up, where people are actually wanting to grow food within that locale, just within that area, maybe just for that village, where there's a little village shop, and they want to grow food to supply the little village shop, so that people can walk to their shop and buy the vegetables that are grown in that area. And so I actually think, as we move forward, that would be a more positive way. Reducing the scale of production makes it more environmentally friendly. And then it also brings in so many other elements in terms of mental health and well-being, connectivity, a sense of community spirit and belonging. So I really am I would hold in mind the idea that it could possibly look like that, where you have many, many multiple small food producers. And that way, actually, then it can be, what's the word? It can be adapted to that particular market, if you like, within that, people who want certain kinds of foods in that area. For another example I have in mind is there's a couple of families who experience extreme poverty in our area, who don't have a car, who can't travel to the larger supermarkets or places or markets where they can get food. So they end up buying food in their local shop, which is more expensive because the people who are in the shop can't find local producers for the food. And so they buy in food from outside at a higher price and charge higher prices. So, I think that actually growing the food within the local community would completely eradicate that problem.
That's a point well made, Kerry. We only have a couple of minutes left. So what I'll do is I'll go around after we've been to Sharon, we'll go around everybody else, just anybody who hasn't spoken yet, if you wanted to make a contribution. But Sharon, why don't you go ahead?
It's actually my husband again, Ian.
Yeah,
hello, Ian.
I was just thinking, hi, I'm originally from the West Highlands of Scotland, and I can remember an old crofter once saying to me, Ian, I can grow anything you want, but I can't sell it. And it made me think about cooperative farming. I think they do a bit of that in Denmark. And, why don't we encourage these people to grow it? And we could have sort of cooperative transport where a lorry goes round and collects all the potatoes at the potato picking time and takes it to wherever and collects the produce so that the farmer doesn't have to worry about getting his produce to market. It's picked up and taken for him. So I think we can think more about, I think the previous speakers talked to some length about that, about, just being more cooperative farming, more cooperative transport, etc. So that's it.
Yep, no, that's very, very good point. And I think there's a lot to learn. One of the things that I've looked, the more to look into this, the more that we can learn actually from. I don't want to sound as if there's a solution already been invented, but there's a lot we can learn from what people used, the way things used to be in the past. Now we have very little time left. Kerry, would you like to make a quick point?
Just really quick, I was just agreeing what the last person said, that it actually connects back to our local culture and our history and the way we produce food originally and how we had to work in collaboration with one another in order to survive and to feed everybody. So that was all. Yeah.
No, that's a good point. I'm going to check if anybody, maybe Stephen or anybody who hasn't, maybe Jane, Darren, if you've got a contribution to make, we have a minute left. But otherwise, I'm very happy to say thank you very much to everyone. It's been really good to spend the 15 minutes with you. I think we maybe should have had longer together, because we would have had more of a discussion. But wish you well on your next trip.
How you all doing?
Hi.
Hiya.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the breakout room. My name is Alistair Finlayson. My colleague Julie is here as well from Perth and Kinross Council. Thank you for inviting us to our new breakout room. Thank you for bearing with us just while we were organising that. Now, I was going to give anybody the opportunity. We honestly will not be offended if you've already been. I'm just having a wee look at the screen, but if you've already been in with Julie and I, then you can make an exit and we won't hold it against you. So it's absolutely no problem. You can pick a question, because what we're going to do is we're going to be running through the same question as we did with the first group, which is our question today is how can a local food plan make the maximum positive impact on our environment and our biodiversity. Now, what I'll do just at the very beginning is I'll just very quickly show you, Julia's sharing her screen at the moment, and we can very quickly show you what the first group have put on the board already. And one of our conversations was about well, a local food plan, how local is local? And we talked about whether it's actually food that's within reach of where you live, or whether it's food that is grown in the area, or whether it's kind of Scotland wide. So that was one of the main things that we talked about. And also we were talking about how food production or food used to be, how it used to be done, and maybe how we have lessons to learn, that we don't actually have to maybe invent something brand new, because there are different ways, there are ways we can look to from history as to how food was originally produced very locally. And we also talked about a little bit about logistics and getting your food to market. Now, let me have a quick look. Our question is, how can, if we had a local food plan, how can that have the maximum positive impact on our environment and on our biodiversity? And I'm just going to open it to anybody who would like to make the first contribution. If it's to do, whether it's to do with making an impact on the environment or making an impact on biodiversity, which is again quite local as well.
Just before everybody starts, Alistair, if anybody's been in this room already and would like to move to a different room, just please tell me now. Eleanor, which room were you in before? You were in this one, were you? In room?
Yes.
The second room one. I'm going to move to room 2. Okay.
I was in this room as well before.
Who was that? Sorry, Darren. Okay. And move to room 2. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Anybody else? Eleanor. Okay. Move to room 2. Okay. Anybody else? We all okay? Right, onwards. Bye-bye.
Very good. Thank you very much, Simon, for that. I'm just going to double check that we've got a wee timer here for 15 minutes. There we are. So nice to see you. Thank you for staying with us. I just wondered whether anybody maybe had a contribution. We're talking, our question just very briefly is about making a positive impact on the environment and on our biodiversity. Now, is anybody from the room either involved in environmental issues or involved in biodiversity? Not really. That's absolutely fine, because I think this question also encompasses issues like how local do you think local food is? Is it important, for example, that people know that where their local food comes from? Because if we had a local food plan, if people were more inclined, if that was more inclined to make people seek out and buy or get their food more locally, would that have a positive impact on the environment, for example, because people wouldn't be traveling? If food was coming to them, or food was more locally available, would that be better because it's not traveling such a great distance?
I think people would
Shall I come in, Alistair?
Well, if you don't mind, Leslie, what I'll do is Paul was first with his contribution,
Sorry.
so we'll do. No, don't apologise. Everybody, we've got time to get round everybody. So what I'll do, Paul, if you're ready to go first, then you can let us know. And Leslie, I'll come to you after Paul, if that's okay. But tell us a little bit. I see from your title, Paul, that you're with the Dunkeld and Burnham Community Orchard.
Yeah.
And what was it you wanted to say?
Well, I was going to say, I've partly forgotten the question now, but what I'm starting to say, do you just want to repeat the question just so I don't go off on a tangent?
Yeah, no, it's fine, absolutely. I might be more interested in what your tangent is, if that's all right. But it's really just about if we had a local food plan, how could that have a positive impact? And the two suggestions are on the environment or on biodiversity. So,
well, you were talking a bit about where the food came from as well. So I think if people are more aware of what's being produced locally, they'll be able to buy it, because people probably aren't aware a lot of the time. I think they prefer to buy locally from a taste point of view, because to store food in the supermarkets, the process quite often involves losing the taste quite a bit. In terms of environmental impact, maybe a slight tangent. There's a project in Newcastle called the Magic Hat Cafe, which picks up leftover food from supermarkets and sells them through their cafe. So it cooks the food and sells it through the cafe. So it's saving that food from going in the bin. It's not aimed at the charity market. It is aimed at being a non-profit making cafe using up the food.
But it's quite actually, it's something that maybe we haven't thought of, is a supply or a source of local food, which is actually just food that is surplus to from other people. It's already in the local area and it's available to be used.
Yeah, I think wonky veg at farms that is mentioned quite often in the previous breakout. A lot of that wonky veg I've seen on Facebook, the farmers bemoaning the fact that they are literally chucking it in the bin. So yeah, that would be a local local food that would be getting used up.
Now I'm going to move across now to Leslie. Now, Leslie, I see from your screen that you're with Tayside Contracts. So what was your contribution really? Over to you.
Okay, so I work procurement officer at Tayside Contracts, so heavily involved in the procurement of our contracts for all the catering within Tayside Contracts. So we look after the Angus area, Dundee and Perth and Ross. So our estate is quite big. I myself work very closely with suppliers to make sure that we can bring in local produce where we can, and to introduce local suppliers into the supply chain. What we have to kind of consider, there's a trade-off sometimes when we're looking at the environmental aspects of, reducing our carbon emissions, for example. So our estate, we've got 93 units that we deliver to in the estate of Tayside. And so we have to make sure, obviously, suppliers have got the capacity to deliver to 93 potential units, which, if you could imagine all the different vehicles on the road going to 93 or, potentially different units, would have quite an impact on our environment. So we have to kind of bear in mind that sometimes, we have to balance with the local deliveries with the environmental, element as well. So we're very conscious of reducing carbon emissions at the same time as growing our local produce and introducing local suppliers. I think and another element that I just wanted to kind of throw in there was, I think what we can do from the environmental aspect with local suppliers is the reduction of our packaging, which I think is very key at the moment. And of course, we're constantly getting a lot of pressure from parents and the public with the amount of plastics. And I think that we could work hand in hand with local suppliers to perhaps come up with some innovative ways of, well, how do we reduce that? And we've, it's not on the catering side, but we did a supplier from Dundee, who's a very small supplier, which is growing bigger and bigger, is now introduced a chemical for cleaning, but it doesn't use any chemicals, so I shouldn't actually call it a chemical, electrolyte, I think it's called, where you take the bottles back and they get refilled, but they've done that through a supply chain because they haven't got the capacity to distribute the product. So they've reduced their carbon footprint for the environment, so that's been great because they're using a distributor to do it who's already on the road, so he's just using their vehicles to fill their capacity. So I think that there's a lot of, sorry, I'm just kind of totally rambling on about lots of things that I'm involved in, and I'm quite passionate about obviously trying to grow our local food plans and working closely with suppliers. I think one of the things that is making sure we've got the demand as well, which is perhaps not in the environment, but when you're saying about, having have we got enough fields to grow the produce that we need? One of the issues that we've come up against in Tayside Contracts is actually not being able to get local produce into the supply chain, for example, chicken. So I think we need to kind of identify the gaps as well as we've obviously got some produce that's surplus. So we need to kind of work out what is the demand for our produce, and where are the gaps, and what can we do to work with, you know, our producers to get more into the market. And again, a lot of it is I think what COVID, you know, one of the probably positives, one of the few positives from in the last 18 months is the fact that I think a lot of the public perception of buying local has changed, and I think people are appreciating what's on their doorstep, and, you know, going to their local, you know, fruit and veg, the butchers, you know, and making use of what we've got, even if you have to spend a little bit more. It's been, I think it's been good for the local economy, but we just need to grow from that and not let us slip back into our old habits of, you know, the convenience of supermarkets. We need to.
I'm going to just sum up your point, or some of the things that you said, because I think I appreciate that what you're saying is that it's actually harder work maybe to go more locally for your food, but it's worthwhile putting the work in.
Yes.
And I think your point about people having more of a local relationship, especially maybe during COVID when people weren't traveling as much, they were having to look for things more close to home. One of the things that another group has said is that people, when they know or where they feel that there's a relationship with where their food comes from, they're quite likely to trust it. And it's a bit like you were saying about the packaging. There's maybe less packaging involved if you know that it's only come from here to here, you know, that it's not needed to go through some industrial process or something. It's just been supplied straight to you. Now I'm going to move on. We haven't got a lot of time left, so I'm going to move on to Anthea sent me a message in the chat, and I'm just going to read it out. Anthea, if you want to come in, just bring yourself off mute, and I'll know that you're wanting to come in to make a contribution. But it was just to mention that they have one of the biggest food growers actually in one of their local areas, who did a good job supplying stew and soup packs to older residents during the pandemic. So it's a way of having a lot of food maybe which is available locally, and people in need of food. And it was maybe, I don't know, was it more of a coordination or an offer to the local area? Anthea, if you do want to come in, just bring yourself off mute and I'll come to you. Otherwise, I'll just look around the group because we have other people. Maybe, I don't know, if Anne, if you want to pop your hand up. Over to you, Anne. What would you like to say?
I think focusing on the maximum positive impact on, but look at the environment as the people in it. So you know, we're a very large, mainly rural area. So definitely during the pandemic, we saw people struggling to afford food that was available locally. One of our projects is a food bank, and I think definitely looking at a dignified use of surplus food, perhaps as well. So instead of supermarkets or whatever saying we've got the surplus food, we don't want to pay to get it put into a dump, so we're going to just give it to food banks, because, you know, people who don't have enough money to buy food, which there are a lot of in Perth and Kinross, should be grateful for whatever they get. But, you know, we've had people saying second-class food for second-class citizens, and that's how people feel. So it's a dignified approach to the use of surplus food. I think there's definitely a place for community larders and community cafes to process surplus food, because people are more likely to, you don't really question what's in a lovely soup when it tastes delicious and it's served with some fresh bread and butter.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. And surplus food is not a reflection on the quality. It's just that the person who first bought it hasn't been able to use it. So it's a question, you know, it's not something like that. I'm going to see if anybody else in the room here is wanting to make a contribution. Thank you, Anthea. I've just got another message to you just to say that there was a huge amount of local resource and coordinating could actually help coordinate those suppliers who could support local people. So on the one hand, they're a big supplier across the UK, but if there's a local dimension to the community that they're based in, I think is the message that could be coordinated as well. Is there anybody else around the group? I'm sorry, we're running out a little bit short of time. Hello, everybody. My name is Alistair Finlayson, and I'm your facilitator for this room. Now, I'm going to give anybody who has found themselves in this room and has discussed this topic of how can a local food plan make the maximum positive impact on our environment and biodiversity. I can see some of you have have been through this with me before in a previous one. So I'm going to say I really don't mind, or I won't be offended if anybody wants to leave the room and join the room that they haven't been in already. Now, let me just have a quick look to make sure I know what I'm doing here. Here we are. Now, let me just have a quick scan around the room. I think, Eleanor, hi, you have your hand up. Is that because you're looking to move to a different room? Yes.
Yes.
Yes, it is. Yeah. Same with you, Jackie. That's absolutely fine. What I'm going to do is, what happened in the last room was the people who found themselves in a room that they'd been in already and not the room that they wanted to be in. We had Simon came and did moves for people. I think you are able to, if you have the option, you do have the option to move yourself to the room. But I'm pretty sure that we'll have help in moving anybody who doesn't have the option up at the moment. So our question, Sharon, go ahead.
I just would like to move as well. And I
Yeah.
don't know, I think that leave button means leave the whole session. It doesn't mean leave the room, does it?
Well,
Blue.
Sheila?
Sharon, yeah, I just moved. So if you go to, see at the bottom, if you hover your icon down the bottom, there's an icon that says breakout rooms. I don't know if you can see that on your screen. Maybe just, so there's participant chat, share screen, record breakout rooms. If you can find the breakout room one and click on it, there's an option within that to move yourself.
I don't have that as an option, Sheila. It's not on my.
Invite the host to this breakout room participants. Yeah, I don't either.
Okay, sorry, that's how I did it. I'm not sure if it's different for everyone.
It was there last time, but when I left the last breakout room, I couldn't join another one. I had to get someone else to put me in the other one.
I think what we'll do then is if I have a volunteer, Sheila, could I maybe just ask you to send a quick message just to say that we need some help from Simon just to get our room sorted out. But in the meantime, we'll get started just so that people don't lose out on time. Because our question, for those of you who are going to be with us for the 15 minutes, is how can a local food plan, if we had a local food plan, how could that make the maximum positive impact on our environment and on our biodiversity? Now, my colleague Julie is here with me, and she's been making notes on the board, which hopefully you can see as well. And some of the themes that we've been talking about are, what is a local scale? For example, if food is local, is it just from your own community or local area, or is it a wider Perth and Kinross area? We talked a little bit about making best use of if you like, surplus food, excess food, leftover food. There's nothing wrong with it, but it could still be used. It's available locally everywhere. Everywhere that orders food in has some kind of surplus. So it's always available locally. And we also talked a little bit about working with producers, people who getting food to market, and people who have a requirement to buy food, but they want to use many more local suppliers. But I think our main question is, how can a local food plan have a positive impact, maximum positive impact on the environment and on our biodiversity? Now, I'm just going to have a look around the room. If you want to make a contribution, just either bring yourself off mute or just raise your hand. I'll come around and hopefully we'll have time to come around everybody. Now, Amanda, I see your hand is up first. Would you like to go first?
Thanks. Sorry, I couldn't find the virtual hand thing.
No problem. I saw your wavy hand.
Yeah, I think it's starting from these are all good points relating to the other groups, but I think it's about how the food is grown and if necessary, providing support and information to groups. For example, our local allotments are organic, that we don't use pesticides and certain things. That's good for the environment as well as for the food. And maybe advice from, I don't know where, PKC or nature groups about incorporating, say, wildflower areas, things like that. I know the issue is getting the land in the first place for local groups, but once you've got that, groups maybe need more information and support about how to grow sustainably.
Yeah, well, I'm going to ask around the group. Does anybody else in the group know about a network for information and support for people who are growing their own food in an allotment? Have people come across that before?
Well, the Scottish Allotments and Garden Society, SAGS, Trellis is a Scottish group which was supporting therapeutic horticulture, but they have a lot of information about just how to grow and community involvement and things like that. And the Perth and Kinross have an allotments team who presumably can advise. And I think they're called Social Farms and Gardens now. They have a scheme for groups to visit other growing areas on, I can't remember what they call it, but you can get funding to help you go and visit another group and get advice and ask questions and that sort of thing.
No, that's good. So what we're on the lookout, if as the conversation goes on in this room, if people have more sources of information for people who are growing their own food and allotments, then that would help. Now, I'm going to go next to Katie. Katie, you've got your hand up here, and I see from your screen that you're from the Trussell Trust. Is that right?
Yes,
Now,
absolutely.
what was it you wanted to say?
It was just really, I guess, a little bit about how the local food plan can set the context for all of these sort of environmental impact type decisions, I suppose, and that it really helps from that point of view of having that hierarchy of not, for example, producing surplus food in the first place, rather than thinking that it's actually a really great thing that we can get lots of surplus and distribute it around. So I would say that the local food plan itself creates that sort of really clear framework for being able to say what is the best type of solution or the best response in a hierarchy, in essence.
So actually, that's quite a good point in that surplus food, although it could be viewed as a good thing in that it becomes available and it's local wherever it is, it's also a bad thing in that it represents food that could maybe have been ordered by somebody else and used by somebody else in the first place, rather than being brought and left unused.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that concept of reducing surplus food needs to be really quite high in any sort of food plan, because it's clearly not environmentally responsible to think that the amount of surplus, you know, should increase, certainly, and certainly shouldn't stay the same either, really.
Is there anybody else around the group who would like to come in with a contribution? Because we have the two things. We have the environmental impact of a local food plan, but also its impact on biodiversity. Now, I think this is maybe the point I think that Amanda was maybe making about where you have food that's grown in an environment, an organic environment, where there's not only does it grow tastier food, but also there's an impact, there's a positive impact on the environment there, because there's no, it improves conditions for greater biodiversity as well. Is that something that can only really be done? What do people think? Is that something that can only really be done at quite a small kind of allotment scale? Or is it something that can be scaled up to maybe someone who's a bigger producer of food?
Well, there are obviously farmers who grow in balance with the environment, and there are grants, I believe, and incentives to plant woodland, for example, or set aside areas around fields for biodiversity. There are already government schemes for that sort of thing. It doesn't only have to be a very small scale thing.
Now, one of the other things that the previous group were talking about in terms of having a positive impact on the environment was that food which is local quite often doesn't need the same degree of packaging and processing, because it doesn't travel such great distances and it doesn't have to be preserved for longer, because it reaches, in theory, it reaches the person who's going to eat it quicker. Then there's an positive environmental impact in maybe either reducing or removing packaging. It can be sold, for example, loose. In previous conversations with orchards and allotments. Does anybody have any experience or views of that, where the reduction in packaging, although you don't eat the packaging, actually removing the need for packaging might have a good environmental impact?
Yeah, there's a local farm shop near us that sells dirty carrots or whatever, loose potatoes, and you just take as many as you want in your canvas bag or whatever. And yeah, that's a positive thing.
Yeah, I don't know if that's what they're actually sold as, dirty carrots, or maybe wash at home carrots might be a bit more.
No, they just advertise them as dirty carrots.
Well,
this is a positive thing.
Well, this was a point I maybe wanted to come on to, because where people know where their food is coming from and where people can see that the carrots are from that farm, actually there's much more of a trust bond. So actually, if you saw somebody advertising dirty carrots and you didn't know who they were, you probably might steer clear. But when you see for example, dirty carrots being sold by the farm that produced them, you might have a bit more trust in that very local relationship. Am I right? Or I don't know what people think about that.
Yeah, and that they've not come from somewhere else and been washed and then say they're local.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things. I don't know what this is. I know that there is a kind of a movement called Farm to Fork, where people get to know where their food comes from. And I don't know whether this is part of this, where people know and have a relationship. Now I'm going to go to Katie after I've spoken to Vicky, because Vicky, I think we haven't heard from you first, but would you like to come in with your contribution?
Yeah, it was just about the sort of dirty carrots element of so like at Christmas, we get like a big box of veg from a local farm. I live in Angus, not Perth and Kinross, I should say.
No, you don't. That's very welcome. Very welcome.
But it's really nice, and actually I find that I probably don't shout about it enough, but I would say like the flavors of the food seem to be better, and I don't know if that is due to the fact they're not being like transported and everything, and they do come and you have to scrub them and whatever. But yeah, I think that's a good point. And then there's also like I know other places where you can get like places are giving paper bags and stuff as well, rather than having to have plastic bags. So yeah, that was all I wanted to add, really.
No, and I think the point you're making about food being tastier, it's not just that it seems tastier, it probably is tastier because it's come directly to you. I'm going to move on quickly, if that's okay, to Katie next, because you had your hand up just a minute ago and we have a little bit of time left, but not a lot. So carry on, Katie.
Sorry, no, I should have taken it down earlier. Sorry, that's
no worries. Don't apologize. Don't apologize. Is there anybody else that maybe we haven't spoken to in the group who would like to make a contribution? Because what we're looking for, what we're hoping to gather thoughts on, is the things that would have a positive impact either on the environment or on biodiversity. We are open for suggestions. We have about a minute left. So we've talked about things like organics, how that can both have a positive impact on the environment and biodiversity. And I think Amanda was saying about how actual support or information or support on how to go about that sort of thing would actually make it more widespread. People would find it easier to adopt. Is anybody else apart from Amanda actually involved in growing food as well, growing food in an allotment or something like that? Or would you like to? Have you been offered?
We took over. We couldn't get any space to grow anything, so we took over an old parking lot and we used that space to put planters in to grow stuff there, and found that really easy. That's how it has kind of grown into a community garden. I have absolutely zero gardening experience, so the community are sort of taking that on themselves. And
that's ideal. So it's like raised beds and planters in an area that isn't really needed for anything else.
It's all concrete, so
that's ideal.